Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's Learn More series with No More Under, we are discussing and celebrating Coming Out Day. And today, Tasha and I are so excited to be joined by Chandrika Francis. She is the owner and founder of Oshun Swim School, which has been a huge support with not only Black and Brown folks swimming, but also in the queer community. So Chandrika, thank you so much for being here. And I would love for you to go into a little bit more of what you do with your practice.
Yeah, thank you all so much for having me. Hello, everyone. Yeah, great to be here. Great to be here on Coming Out Day. I have a little bit of a cough, so I may be speaking a little extra slow. Um, but yes, happy to talk a little bit more. I think there's just so much healing potential in water. And I think that learning how to swim can be empowering in so many ways. And learning how to just deepen our relationship with water can lead to so much self-confidence and trust. Um, and especially when your identity is feeling is feeling like safe and held. Um, and so, yeah, so my work, I am focus is Black women, other women of color, non-binary folks of color, and definitely have some programming specifically for queer folks. And mostly it's looking like swimming lessons, but I also do workshops that are more broad around building our relationship with water.
Beautiful. And I would love, if you don't mind, since we are talking about coming out day, did you have a specific coming out moment? How has that worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been out in these gay streets for a while now, but it does feel like it's ongoing. I think because of heteronormativity, there's always the assumption that everyone's straight until proven gay. So yeah, it's ongoing. I think in this work, um, it just gives me excuse me, an extra lens of just intersectionality and an extra importance around creating safe space based on identity. Um, and I think that, yeah, I have a lot of students, a lot of queer students who don't feel particularly safe in a lot of swim spaces. You know, you have the addition of like gender expectations around what you wear and which locker room you go into. And it can feel like a very vulnerable space in those ways. And so I think that being a queer person, I feel like am in a unique position to support students and hopefully create safer spaces for queer folks. And yeah, thinking about coming out specifically, yeah, I love coming out stories. And it's interesting. I think for me, I knew I was probably gay like pretty early on, like elementary. But I was like, this can't be like I don't play sports, so obviously like I can't be gay. I'm like, I'm not a tomboy. It's funny that when I look back at pictures, I'm like, oh, you actually were a tomboy. But I felt very feminine. I didn't think those things went together, and I also just like literally didn't want to deal with it. But after a while, it was just like, okay, this is not going away. And I think for a long time I was ready, but I just couldn't figure out how to do it within my same, like within the world that I was already in. So I kind of waited until I got to college, and I had this like vision that was came true to the T at where I was like, okay, coming out. How do you start? Because like usually like there's sort of like this conversation of like, oh yeah, my ex girlfriend, and then everyone's like, okay, you're gay. Like that's the indicator, and I'm like, I don't have an ex girlfriend, so like how do I do this? I just remember feeling like I needed some help, and I had this vision of like because I got invited to do this summer, like before college summer program that was for first generation college students and students of color. And I was like, I feel like this is, and it was identity focused. And I'm like, this is going to be it. This is going to be the perfect space. And I had done this one activity before where you step into the circle based on your identity. And I'm like, they're going to have a circle like that. I'm going to step into the circle, and this is just going to be the beginning of my new life. And that's like literally how it happened. And I think from there, I just got to just be a new person. Everyone's like, oh yeah, like you're just a queer person. I'm like, yes, that is, you're correct. So it just kind of happened all at once. In a way, like that was my life there. And then I think that so much happened at that age, around 18, of coming into myself. And I just, one thing I like to speak to for folks um, who are, in that process is like the amount of self worth and just like personal power that came from overcoming that. I feel like I've been on like I feel like I was on a 10-year high from that. Like it was just like I can do this, I can do anything. And it wasn't just that, there was a lot of other personal development things, a lot of coming out of my shell all at once at that age. But I think it really just gave me this boost of like what if I could do that, like literally, like I just felt so much more powerful. And I think it led to so much more self-discovery and so much more just really actually tuning into what feels right versus what I'm supposed to be doing, or like going along a track. It just changed my whole life in terms of like, oh, everything I thought. I'm like, I planned on being married at 25 and like having 2.5 kids like by 30. And that was my groove. And there's nothing wrong with that. That can be beautiful. But knowing that that expectation isn't there anymore, it just kind of opened up like what actually feels right. And so that has served me for my whole life. And um, yeah, and it's also an ongoing process. I think I still have family who I like pretty actively try to not. I definitely have never said that I was straight, but people put that on me, and I think I still have some family members who I'm like, I don't think I really want to do this with you. And some spaces where I'm like, it's too much work, it's too much risk, it's too much danger involved. So it's always a process. There's yeah, but it's been really beautiful and has really served my whole life, including my work.
That's so amazing. When in that journey did water become involved, or was water involved for you before that, or was it something you turned to because water has such a beautiful, inviting, like healing side? So yeah, when did water become part of you and your identity? Because obviously it's so much of what you do now.
Yeah, I would say that I kind of group being connected to water and earth together. Um, my life is much more explicitly about water now, but it's been about earth connection like my whole life, and that has included land and water. And I think for me, in so many ways, where in the human world it can feel very challenging to find a sense of belonging and a sense of self, um, along racial lines, along um, sexual orientation, other identity things, that being connected to the earth and water has been this place of complete belonging that has carried me through a lot of times where I didn't find it in any other spaces. So I think that is, yeah, it's really important, and it's so it's like you don't have to explain yourself. There's just so much sense of belonging when you have, some of the safety and skills around being on the earth and in the water. It's just, it's like you get to go beyond your identity, but also supported in your exact identity. So yeah, it feels very connected in that way.
That's beautiful. And I was gonna just ask you, as far as like the work that you do, kind of creating those safe spaces for BIPOC and queer folks, like what are some of the ways, I guess this is kind of a two-part question. What are some ways maybe that queer folks don't feel safe around water spaces? Or why is there, you just mentioned danger earlier, and it kind of made me think about that, water doesn't always feel safe. And then I think my second question, or a follow-up question, would just be, how can we in the swim community address that?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. Yeah, I think the issue of safety and like being in a state of hypervigilance is just, there's so many layers, especially if you're Black and queer and a woman, or a femme. And I think that when you live so much of your life in a state of hypervigilance around not being like emotionally or physically attacked, that the idea of layering on like literal drowning is just like, I think a lot of queer folks are like, why would I want to feel even more afraid for my life? So I think that there is an extra layer, a barrier there. And then on top of that, like just thinking about being in a swimsuit and being exposed. I had an interesting conversation with a excuse me, a participant in a workshop the other day who was saying that they have, as they're navigating their gender expression and identity, that they have a bunch of different swim outfits so that no matter where they are feeling in their comfort around the way that they dress and express themselves, there's a swim outfit for that. So if it wants to be more masculine or more modest or more feminine, there's something there so that they can always feel themselves when they go swimming. I thought that was like a really cool way to work with that, because I know that bathing suits feel very uncomfortable for a lot of folks. And then I also think, yeah, a lot of the swimming, like mainstream swimming world is very kind of like gives me a little bit of a military vibe, a little bit of, there's like whistles blowing and like drill sergeant type experience that and what goes along with that is like a lot of very like rigid gender expectations. And then I think you also have just like the reality of like changing rooms, which is I think is something that a lot of the swimming world who's trying to be more inclusive of queer communities is trying to contend with. And it is, I think there's like a very real logistical challenge around a lot of facilities have 2 changing rooms, and like how do you make everyone feel safe? And and I think these conversations around gender and changing space and everything, we also have to think about women feeling safe and wanting women-only spaces, which I think is also valid. And then you have queer folks who might be needing spaces that aren't by gender. So how do you really meet the needs of both those groups, but also deal with the physical logistics of maybe just having 2 changing rooms? So I think that comes up a lot. I remember once having a workshop, and it was at a YMCA, and we talked about, hey, we have like queer folks, we want to make sure we're being inclusive in our changing room spaces. And so we had a great talk with them. We kind of made sure that one space was like women and non-binary folks, like there was room for gender diverse folks. And we did all the things, we put up we talked to them. But then of course, then we're in there, and then there was an older woman in there who like approached someone who's genderqueer and told them they were in the wrong dressing room. And she wasn't like attacking, but it was just clearly like, you got to go. And she really had no idea. And so there's often this piece of like, yes, you can put the sign on the door, but there's this education piece that is part of creating that safety, not just the signage. Because you got people in the dressing rooms who have really no idea what you're talking about, and that can lead to a bad situation for everyone. So I think that's something that we can still work on. I think that some places have like that, are able to have a third space that maybe traditionally is a family space, but then can transition to be like an all gender space. So you can still have areas that are just for women. And I think, there's less of a need for men only like spaces around safety. And so I think that's another thing that could be interesting. Like, what if we had a women only space and an all gender space? Of course, then you're like, you're going to be a non-binary person in a room with like a bunch of straight men who might not be safe for you. So it gets complex. I think that's one thing that we can definitely work on in swim. I think there's been a lot of growth around different swim wear options that are more inclusive. I think that's one that has been growing. Like I know there's like Tomboy X, and they're like queer bathing suit line. So yeah, I think that there are some things that are changing. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
No, I love that for sure. Tosh?
Yeah, talking about the spaces. So I remember as a previous swimmer, I traveled quite a bit for swimming, and I can't remember where in the UK I was, but I remember specifically that and this was about 10 years ago. So it's always been something that I've wondered why more places haven't done it. They had just individual, there was no men, there was no women space. It was just like, what I imagine they'd done is they'd removed the 2 locker rooms, they cleared it out and just made individual cubbies for you to go into, or like bathrooms with a door, obviously, and wall, so you're private. But there was just no gender attached to it, and or no identity. It was just like, this is where you get changed. This is where you go to the bathroom. There's 20 toilets in individual stalls, and there's 20 training rooms in individual stalls, and that was really powerful. And then there was some that were slightly larger, so whether you need a wheelchair to get in or whether you're bringing 3 kids in with you, there were some that were bigger and some that were clearly for a single person. So, I entered the single person one, and that's something that really impressed me, and is pretty big in parts of the UK. And so I imagine that, it's conversations like these, and as we continue to push, that it is possible to make a space where everyone's welcome, and maybe it's not labeling them. Maybe it's just like there's no labels, because that way everyone and anyone is there,
Yeah, I think that's a great point. These sort of design solutions can really be helpful. Yeah, I'm hearing that.
Totally. Yeah, it's so important just building the space where, because if you're going through those challenges, or, with your story and trying to decide where to step into the circle and trying to decide where to claim your identity and share it, to then have to worry about going into a locker room and being told that you're not supposed to be there. I can't imagine the challenge or the turmoil that comes with that when you're already facing so much. Like the story you just shared, that's so hard, because all of a sudden they feel like they don't belong, but that's their identity. And that's what conversations like these have got to keep pushing forward on, right?
For sure. And I think that's, for me, just like, we consider, as queer folks, but then you continue on into transgender, and really that, I don't know, I just have so much empathy for the transition period in time, and the thought and just, frustration that has to go into those moments like that. So,
right.
Yeah.
I love it. I think, Chandrika, hearing your story about, you kind of knowing how you felt from a young age, I think for me, I was in an opposite space of feeling away later on in life, and even after being married for 12 years. I was able to look back at pictures when I was younger, and even understanding some of the relationships that I had when I was younger, and understanding that I've felt queer for a long time and haven't necessarily known that's how I was feeling. And I think, I look at something like, today as National Coming Out Day. I've shared with a lot of my personal friends and my close friends and family how I feel, and that I'm dating women. But it is just kind of a constant coming out. And that's why I kind of ask you about your story. Are you still doing it? Because it just feels like it's something that I am straight presenting. I have children, and so it's been an interesting shift, and I'm still learning and growing through that, and understanding all of the intricacies of just even joining the queer community. But it's been beautiful, and I'm grateful for. I know we don't talk all the time, Chandrika, but you've definitely been, a strong person, in my journey, and just through healing after Yori, and just even coming into this space. So I appreciate you more than you know.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. That means a lot. And, I just, I think back to when I was not really comfortable being fully in myself in that way, and how much it meant to me to hear things like that and hear people share, wherever they are in their journey, and be open about it. Really was so, like, I remember just like every time hearing something, it just being like this little jewel that I just kept in my pocket. So yeah, thank you for being open and sharing that. And 13-year-old me would be proud to know she's out here a queer icon. Definitely gonna put that in my pocket.
I love that. I love that. But thank you so much. I mean, not only just what you've done for me, but again, in the community. And I know that you travel. And so if you just at least want to shout out, I'm sure we'll put it in all of our messaging, but if you want to shout out your website so that people can check you when you are in New York or Seattle or, all over, your work.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, you can definitely find me at oshunswimschool.com. And yeah, most of my work has been based in Seattle. I've been really blessed to be able to travel a bit too. Have been doing work in New York, excuse me, and in this year in Philly. So having some East Coast time. I'll be out there in November and December. Yeah, and definitely love to connect to folks who are on this journey, and I'm looking forward to having more and more queer spaces. Getting really hyped about some sort of like queer mermaid experience. Still working on that. And yeah, I just want to, say again that like the water is it's such a space for everyone, and certainly for like queer folks, and like water is just so not about binaries, that there is just, I think, something special around when queer folks are able to, come to the water and come together in the water. It's just really important. And for anyone listening who is queer and who is wanting to have more water connection, I just totally sending support your way, and encouragement.
And we just have to lastly say happy coming out day, right?
Yes.
I love it. So thank you so much again, Chandrika, for your time and all of your work and energy that you put around the water space, BIPOC, queer. We're grateful for you. So thank you all again for joining us in our Learn More series, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great one.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.